Hi, my name is Taya and I'm here to teach you a little bit about art history. Today we're taking a trip to Norway and learning about the life and legacy of Edvard Munch. Edvard Munch, born 1863, was a Norwegian painter and printmaker whose works built upon the psychological themes and evocative nature of 19th century surrealism and was used as an influence for early 20th century German expressionism. His famous painting, The Scream, is not only a symbol of modern spiritual anguish, but one of the most recognizable works in the Western world. Edvard Munch was born in a farmhouse to parents Laura and Christian. His father, Christian, was a doctor and medical officer who married Laura when she was half his age in 1861. The artist had one elder sister, Joanne Sophie, and three younger siblings, Peter Andreas, Laura Catherine, and Inga Marie. The family moved to Kristiania, modern-day Oslo, in 1864 when Christian was appointed a medical officer position. Unfortunately, his mother Laura died of tuberculosis in 1868, and then his sister Joanne Sophie in 1877. The children were raised by their father and their aunt Karen. Plagued by illness, Edvard often stayed home drawing and was tutored by his friends and aunt. His father taught him about history and literature and entertained the children with ghost stories and tales of Edgar Allan Poe. About his father, Munch wrote, "My father was temperamentally nervous and obsessively religious, to the point of psychoneurosis. From him I inherited the seeds of madness. The angels of fear, sorrow, and death stood by my side since the day I was born. The father would discipline the children by telling them their mother was looking down and grieving over their behaviour. Only one of 5 siblings married, but Andreas died only a few months after the wedding. Laura, Edvard's youngest sister, was diagnosed with a mental illness at a very young age. Munch wrote that I inherited 2 of mankind's most frightful enemies, the heritage of consumption and insanity." Christian's pay was low and he failed at opening a private practice. The family was impoverished, moving frequently from one flat to another. These interiors are often depicted in Edvard's early drawings and watercolours. By his teens, he was obsessed with art and he returned to the Art Association to copy paintings at the Norwegian Landscape School. In 1879, Munch enrolled to study engineering at a technical college where he excelled at physics, chemistry, and mathematics. He also began learning scaled and perspective drawing, but frequent illness continued to disrupt his learning. To his father's disapproval, Munch left college to pursue painting the following year, adopting an undogmatic stance towards art. He wrote, "In my art, I attempt to explain life and its meaning to myself." In 1881, he enrolled at the Royal School of Art and Design in Kristiania, where he was taught by sculptor Julius Middleton and painter Christian Krogh. And by 1883, he participated in his first public exhibition and shared a studio with other students. From a young age, the artist was inspired by Impressionism and he experimented with many styles, which landed him negative criticism from the press and constant rebukes from his father, who nevertheless continued paying his living expenses. His relationship with his father was further harmed by his friendship with nihilist Hans Jaeger, who advocated suicide as the ultimate freedom. Munch wrote, "My ideas developed under the influence of the bohemians, or rather under Hans Jaeger. Many people have mistakenly claimed that my ideas were formed under the influence of Streidenberg or the Germans, but this is wrong. They had already been formed by then." Munch decided Impressionism was superficial and too akin to scientific experimentation. He wanted expression, feeling a need to go deeper and explore emotional content. Under Jaeger's instruction, Munch began exploring his own emotional and psychological state in his Soul's Diary. This period developed a new view of his own art, writing the painting The Sick Child based on his sister's death was his first soul painting. The painting only received negative responses from critics and his family. By the 1880s, Munch continued to struggle to finding his own style. He was veering towards naturalistic and impressionism. He began calculating his compositions with the aim of creating tension and emotion. His works became stylistically inspired by post-impressionism, a symbolist subject matter, and began depicting a state of mind. By 1889, Munch hosted his first solo show, which led to a 2-year state scholarship to study in Paris under Léon Bonnet. Munch moved to Paris during the Exposition Universelle of 1889 and roamed with 2 fellow artists. His mornings were spent at Bonnet's studio, then he roamed exhibitions, galleries, and museums in the afternoon where he, alongside other students, were expected to make copies to learn technique and observation. While the artist was unenthused by Benet's drawing lessons, he enjoyed the master's commentary at museums. He became inspired by the work of early modern European artists, especially Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh, who utilized color to convey emotion. Munch was enthralled by Gauguin's reaction against realism and his credo that art was human work and not an imitation of nature. A friend later wrote of Munch, he need not make his way to Tahiti to see and experience the primitive in human nature. He carries his own Tahiti within him. The work of Gauguin and Max Klinger inspired the artist to begin experimenting with prints, a medium that would later prove helpful with Munch's symbolic imagery. Alongside his contemporary Nikolai Astrup, Munch brought the woodcut medium to Norway. His family was left destitute in 1889 when his father died, so he returned home and took out a loan to help when relatives failed to assist. He then assumed financial responsibility for his family. On his father's death, Munch wrote, "I lived with the dead, my mother, my sister, my grandfather, my father. Kill yourself and then it's over. Why live?" His works during this period included sketchy tavern scenes and bright cityscapes while experimenting with pointillism. By 1892, Munch had found his style. This original synthetist aesthetic can be seen in Melancholy 1891, which artist and journalist Christian Krogh named the first symbolist painting by a Norwegian artist. The work was exhibited at the Autumn Exhibition in Oslo 1891. The Union of Berlin Artists invited Munch in 1892 to exhibit at its November exhibition, the Society's first one-man exhibition. His paintings were met with bitter controversy, and the exhibit closed after 1 week. Despite this, Munch was pleased, writing, "Never had I had such an amusing time. It's incredible that something as innocent as painting should have created such a stir." During his 4 years in Berlin, Munch met August Strindberg and Holger Brockmann. He sketched ideas that would become his major work, The Frieze of Life. He only sold a little, but he made a steady income by charging to view his controversial works. He was reluctant to part with his paintings, which he termed his children. This period is the beginning of his mature style, shown in his casino paintings that show a simplification of form and detail. The artist began favouring a shallow pictorial space and a minimal background for his frontal portraits. His figures began to appear more symbolic than realistic, as in The Scream. He writes, "No longer should interiors be painted, people reading and women knitting. There would be living people, breathing and feeling, suffering and loving." The Scream was painted in 1893, depicting an agonized face symbolizing the anxiety of the human condition. Munch recalled that the sunset turned the clouds blood red while he was out for a walk, and he sensed, quote, "an infinite scream passing through nature." Scholars have suggested other explanations for the unnatural sky, such as a volcanic eruption or a psychological reaction to his sister's commitment to a nearby mental institution. Many don't know there are actually 4 versions of this work, 2 in paint and 2 in pastel, as well as a lithograph stone from which several prints still survive. In 1893, Munch exhibited, among other pieces, 6 paintings entitled Study for his series, Love. This began a cycle he later called The Frieze of Life, a poem about life, love, and death, motifs which are steeped in atmosphere and illustrate the nocturnal side of love. The entire frieze was shown in 1902 at the Successional exhibit in Berlin. The themes from the frieze reoccur throughout Munch's work, especially in the 1890s, where he tapped into his feelings to examine major motifs such as the stages of life, the femme fatale, the hopelessness of love, anxiety, infidelity, jealousy, sexual humiliation, and separation in life and death. The artist typically used shadows and rings of colour around figures to emphasise fear, menace, anxiety, or sexual intensity, and have been interpreted as reflections of Munch's sexual anxieties or his turbulent relationship with love itself. Munch moved to Paris again in 1896, where he continued to focus on his representations of his frieze of life themes. This included developing his woodcut and lithograph technique. The same year, Siegfried Bing held an exhibition of the artist's work inside the House of New Art, displaying 60 works. This exhibition introduced Munch to a French audience, though many French critics saw his works as violent and brutal despite serious attention and large audiences. This saw a significant improvement for his financial situation, and he brought himself a summer home, which was a small fisherman's cabin built in the late 18th century in Norway. He called the cabin his happy house and would return every summer for 20 years. When he returned to Christiania in 1897 to grudging acceptance from critics, he began an intimate relationship with the liberated upper-class woman Tulla Larsen. After travelling together, he began a fertile period in his art, even completing his final painting in the Frieze of Life series. Larsen was eager to get married, but Munch was not. He wrote in third person, "Ever since he was a child, he hated marriage. His sick and nervous home had given him the feeling that he had no right to get married." Although he almost gave in, Munch fled Larsen and her considerable fortune in 1900 to move to Berlin. He exhibited his works at the Hall of the Berlin Secession in 1902, which received a lot of approval, though critics still found his work strange. This positive press gained Munch the attention of influential patrons Albert Coleman and Max Lind. However, despite his happiness with the positive changes in his life, the artist's self-destructive and erratic behavior resulted in a violent fight with a fellow artist and an accidental shooting around Larsen in which he briefly reconciled with, in which he lost 2 of his fingers. After the shooting and subsequent events, such as Larsen marrying a younger colleague of Munch, the artist sawed a painting depicting the couple in half. He was betrayed and humiliated, and this bitterness is visible in new paintings where he references the shooting and its side effects. Munch exhibited in Paris in 1903 and 1904 and was liked by the Fauvists, who invited him to exhibit alongside them when they held their own exhibition in 1906. He began receiving portrait commissions and prints that again improved his financial situation. In 1908, a mix of anxiety, drinking, and fighting led to hallucinations and feelings of persecution. He wrote, "My condition was veering on madness. It was touch and go." He entered the clinic of Daniel Jacobson that year and received therapy for 8 months, as well as a diet and electrification. This seemingly stabilized his personality, and he returned to Norway in 1909, and we see less pessimism and more color in his works. Christiania had started liking his work, with museums purchasing his artworks and being made a Knight of the Royal Order of St. Olaf for services in art. Dr. Jacobson ordered Munch to socialize with good friends and avoid drinking in public to aid his recovery, and Munch followed his advice. He began producing full-length portraits of friends and patrons, as well as landscapes and scenes of people working and playing in the new optimistic style. Munch had a stable income, which allowed him to buy several properties and provide for his family. Munch was divided when World War I broke out, stating, "All my friends are German, but it is France I love." The rise of the Nazi movement forced his German patrons, as well as Jewish patrons, to lose their fortunes and many of them their lives. The artist felt lucky to have survived a bout of the Spanish flu in 1918 during the worldwide pandemic, given his poor health history. The last 2 decades of the artist's life were spent in solitude, with his paintings celebrating farm life. He attracted a steady stream of female models, and it is likely he had sexual relationships with some of them. Munch continued painting self-portraits until his death. During the 1930s and 1940s, his works were labelled degenerate art alongside Picasso, Klee, Matisse, Gauguin, and many other artists by the Nazis. 82 of his works were removed from German museums. In 1940, Norway was invaded and taken over by Germany. At 96 years old, Munch was scared of a Nazi confiscation, as he had nearly an entire art collection in the second floor of his home. 71 of his stolen works were returned to Norway through the purchase of collectors, of which the other 11 were never recovered. Munch died in early 1944, and his Nazi-orchestrated funeral suggested he was a Nazi sympathizer. Here are some of Edvard Munch's most famous works. The Sick Child, Evening on Karl Johan Street, The Scream, Ashes, Woman in 3 Stages, Madonna, Melancholy, Self-Portrait with Cigarette, Death in the Sick Room, The Dance of Life, The Dead Mother, Moonlight, and Self-Portrait Between the Clock and the Bed. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos just like this.